Welcome to The Debate. Our discussion today centers on Bill Vincent's profound book, Not Your Fight, which introduces the often counterintuitive concept that the battle is not yours, but God's. The book champions surrender as the true path to victory, challenging us to embrace a posture of trust in the face of chaos, and a core theme woven throughout the text is the idea of standing still and witnessing God's salvation. However, the precise interpretation of this stillness presents a fascinating point of intellectual exchange for us. Today, we delve into the central question. Does Not Your Fight advocate for a radical cessation of nearly all human effort and strategy, emphasizing pure, holy inaction? Or does it call for a divinely guided, active waiting that still includes strategic, responsible human action? I'll be arguing for the necessity of active faith and responsible action, even within a framework of profound surrender, suggesting that standing still isn't necessarily passive.
And I'll present a perspective emphasizing the profound call to holy inaction and really the complete relinquishment of human strategy, highlighting the inherent failure, as the book sees it, of human strength when confronted with God's battles. The book, in my view, pushes us towards a radical and total dependence on divine intervention.
Is not, in my view, a call to complete passivity or, paralysis. Rather, it's a cessation of anxious striving and self-reliant manipulation, which then allows for obedient, divinely prompted action. Chapter 5 clearly states, standing still means preparing in faith while refusing to manipulate outcomes, and it offers a very practical, tangible example. Job hunting, send resumes, action, but don't lie to get hired, control. This isn't just about inaction, it's more about how we act and why. Furthermore, in the conclusion, when discussing the practical application of surrender, it suggests for finances that I'll budget wisely. And for health, it states I'll steward my body.
Now, these are undeniable human actions, indicating that within God's larger battle plan, there is still a vital sphere for human responsibility and deliberate steps, albeit steps taken in trust. So while I understand the powerful message of relinquishment, my reading suggests a dynamic tension between human stewardship and divine sovereignty.
Yeah, I see that point, but I come at it from a different way. The book's overarching message, I think, is a profound call to radical surrender, what it repeatedly terms holy inaction, and a complete reliance on God precisely because human strength will, quote, always fail. The introduction highlights King Jehoshaphat, who, facing overwhelming odds against a vast army, outnumbered and out-resourced, admitted his powerlessness. His prayer wasn't polished, it was raw honesty. We have no power, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. God's response was definitive and, profoundly instructive. Stand still, the battle is mine. Chapter 6, pointedly titled, Why Your Strength Will Always Fail, explicitly reinforces this, stating, Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. The core message, as I read it, is about God deliberately reducing human involvement, even removing what might seem like logical strategic actions to prove the victory was His. This isn't about discerning what specific action to take. It seems to me it's about realizing our actions are fundamentally insufficient, if not counterproductive in His battles. The emphasis is just squarely on His might, not ours in any capacity. Okay, but let's dig into this interpretation of stand still and holy inaction a bit more. The book really emphasizes holy inaction back in chapter 5, right? And it directly links it to that Sarah Hagar warning, where human efforts to help God out resulted in significant and enduring conflict. That's a crucial parallel, I think. It defines one of the Hebrew meanings of be still as chadal. Cease striving, stop overworking what only God can do, in the conclusion.
This language suggests a deliberate cessation of all personal attempts to control or force outcomes, not merely a refinement of how one acts. So Jehoshaphat's response, it wasn't a strategic military counterplan, was it? It was simply prayer and sending a choir ahead of the army. This seems to be the blueprint for true stillness, a profound, almost total withdrawal of human strategic effort. How do you reconcile this cessation of striving, especially with that clear warning from Sarah and Hagar, with a call for active human strategy?
Right. Okay. You make a compelling point about cease striving and, yeah, the dangers of human manipulation. And that Sarah Hagar story, well, it's definitely a powerful picture of what not to do, you know? It absolutely shows how pointless those human-driven schemes are. But does stopping striving necessarily equate to stopping all action? Or is it about ceasing anxious, self-driven striving to create space for divinely guided, peaceful action? Consider the Israelites at the Red Sea, also cited in chapter 5. They were packed and ready, a posture of active waiting, poised for God's clear directive. They weren't striving in a manipulative sense, but their readiness was an action, a preparedness for what God would command. That stillness wasn't paralysis, it was a purposeful pause, a kind of strategic holding pattern for God's clear directive. It implies a dynamic of readiness, not a total void of human capability.
I understand the nuance you're drawing with active waiting, yeah. And the Israelites at the Red Sea are a powerful image of being prepared. However, the crucial element there, it seems to me, is that they stood still until God acted. They didn't pack and then, start digging a trench or building rafts while waiting. Their readiness was passive in the sense that they initiated no physical action until a divine command. The core message of Trud Hall, cease striving, it points to halting our efforts to secure the outcome. Jehoshaphat didn't prepare his troops for battle in any conventional way. He sent singers. This is a dramatic and frankly counterintuitive absence of what we would typically consider strategic human action. The book is consistently redirecting our gaze from our hands to God's hand.
But I believe the distinction lies in the source and nature of the action. The text doesn't say cease all action. It says cease striving, which implies a particular type of action, one rooted in self-reliance or fear or a desire to control. The examples of budgeting wisely or stewarding one's body, as mentioned in the conclusion, those are actions. They aren't striving or manipulating outcomes, but responsible, obedient stewardship within God's larger plan. The Israelites were ready to obey when commanded. Their standing still wasn't an end in itself, but a preparation for a specific divinely ordained movement. The book isn't promoting a complete suspension of human faculties, but rather redirecting them from self-generated effort to God-directed obedience. It's about letting God lead, not removing oneself from the field entirely. Let's maybe pivot slightly to the role of human strength versus divine power. You've highlighted a crucial aspect of God's sovereignty in reducing Gideon's army, and that message of not by might. That absolutely underscores the book's emphasis on God's power. But how do we then interpret passages like Paul's thorn or the widow's oil, where God's power seems to operate through acknowledged human weakness or an act of obedience? Chapter 6 references Paul's thorn, where God declares, "My power is made perfect in weakness." Now, this isn't an implication that God replaces all human effort. It suggests his power works through human weakness, transforming it into a vessel for his glory. It's not about being utterly inert, but about moving from a position of acknowledged weakness into a posture of reliance where God's strength is manifest through us. The example of the widow's oil in chapter 6 states, "The oil flowed as long as she kept pouring," symbolizing God's supply, meeting our obedience. Obedience inherently implies an action, a human action, albeit one guided by divine instruction. This points to a partnership of reliance, where human action, however weak, is still present and necessary, rather than a complete absence of the human element.
The book, I believe, consistently presents human strength as inherently failing and, well, insufficient when confronted with battles that belong to God. Chapter 6's opening story of the author collapsing after 72 hours of being the strong one for his family precisely illustrates this point. His own strength ran out, and that was the turning point. God, in that instance, had to intervene because human strength had failed.
More strikingly, the text describes how God intentionally reduced 32,000 soldiers to 300 to prove the victory was his in Gideon's army, which was a deliberate and radical removal of human might, not a leveraging of it. The core message of not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, it isn't about setting the stage for leveraging weakness to then activate some human action. Rather, it's recognizing that our strength, however it's framed or seemingly obedient, is fundamentally inadequate. And the practical steps the book provides for leveraging weakness consistently remove human agency. It suggests we replace "God help me" with "God be my strength," and use "I can't, but you can" for prayers. This doesn't feel like partnership in the sense of shared effort. It feels like a complete transfer of power and responsibility.
I hear your emphasis on the radical removal of human strength, and Gideon's story is certainly a powerful testament to God proving his victory. But if God truly desired a complete absence of human action, why didn't Gideon's 300 simply stand by and watch? They still picked up trumpets and jars and then shouted and broke the jars. These were physical actions, albeit unusual ones, directed by God. They weren't their strategy, but they were their actions. Likewise, with Paul's thorn, God's power being perfected in weakness doesn't mean Paul stopped preaching or traveling. It means God's strength was evident in and through Paul's weakness, enabling him to continue his ministry. The book never advocates for ceasing all ministry or daily responsibilities. It calls for surrender in those activities.
Okay, but those actions of Gideon's 300 were so counterintuitive to conventional warfare that they precisely served to highlight the absurdity of human strength and the necessity of divine intervention. They weren't strategic actions in the human sense. They were symbolic, almost ritualistic acts of obedience designed to demonstrate that the victory was not by their might. And for Paul, his weakness amplified God's power, yes, but it was God acting in Paul's weakness, not Paul's weakness becoming a platform for his own continued human effort in the way we typically think of it. The book is very clear that our strength will always fail, and when God's power is involved, it often means the suspension or even the reversal of conventional human effort. The consistently repeated message is, God fights for you, which strongly implies a substitution, not a collaboration of strength. And when we look at the practical application of surrender in daily life, the surrender experiment in the conclusion asks readers to literally lay hands on the paper and pray, God, this is yours. This is a radical, almost ritualistic relinquishment of control over a specific battle or situation. Consider also the example of George Mueller as recounted in Chapter 8, who cultivated unshakable trust by never telling human needs to donors, only to God. This exemplifies a complete rejection of human channels or strategies for provision, trusting solely in divine intervention and removing all strategic human maneuvering for results. It's about a total hands-off approach to the practical outcome, and these examples strongly support my interpretation of holy inaction as a complete cessation of human initiative in these battles.
I see why you emphasize those powerful examples, especially Mueller's radical trust, which, sets a very high bar for total dependence. However, while Mueller's approach is profoundly illustrative of absolute reliance, the book also provides guidance that integrates human wisdom into surrender without negating it entirely. The same conclusion that introduces the surrender experiment offers these very practical examples for everyday life. For finances, it says, I'll budget wisely, but I trust you as my provider. For relationships, I'll love authentically, but I release outcomes to you. For health, I'll steward my body, but healing is your department. Now, these are clearly human actions, deliberate, wise, and responsible steps. They are done in wisdom, but with the outcome surrendered to God. This isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing what's within our stewardship and responsibility while trusting God for the results beyond our control. It feels like a dynamic tension, a careful balance, not an absolute cessation of all practical engagement. The book seems to be showing us how to live through a battle, not simply sit idly by.
But budgeting wisely and stewarding one's body, aren't those more like preventative or maintenance actions? They aren't the battle-fighting actions that the book seems primarily focused on when it says, the battle is not yours. When facing a financial crisis or a health battle, Mueller's example suggests we cease actively seeking solutions through human means. No appeals to donors, no frantic calls for help. The budgeting and stewarding might be foundational responsibilities, sure, But when the battle arrives, the call seems to be for radical disengagement from human problem solving in favor of divine intervention. The surrender experiment itself is an act of handing over the problem and solution to God, not just the outcome of our own wise actions. If the battle truly isn't ours, then our strategies for winning it are irrelevant and, according to that Sarah Hagar warning, potentially quite counterproductive.
Well, I'd argue the very framing of stewarding your body and budgeting wisely implies active decision-making and implementation, even when facing a health challenge or financial strain. These aren't just preventative, they are part of living responsibly in faith, regardless of the immediate battle. If one has cancer, for instance, stewarding my body could very well include pursuing specific, perhaps God-guided medical treatment, not just sitting in holy inaction. The book seems to distinguish between striving in self-reliance and obediently taking wise steps. The phrase, "the battle is not yours," refers to the victory and the overarching strategy, but it doesn't nullify our role as stewards and obedient participants within that larger divine plan. The book is teaching us how to fight by letting God lead, which often involves our active participation under His command, rather than a complete absence from the field. It's a redefinition of our role, I think, not an elimination of it. Our discussion today has truly illuminated the nuanced yet powerful message of Bill Vincent's Not Your Fight. I've highlighted that while the book champions profound surrender and trust, it also implies, I believe, a vital role for active, divinely guided faith and responsible action within that framework. My argument is that standing still means distinguishing between striving in self-reliance and obeying God's lead, allowing for purposeful human engagement when directed.
And I have underscored that the overwhelming emphasis of the material leans towards a radical relinquishment of human strength and strategy, promoting holy inaction, and a complete reliance on God's power to fight and win our battles. In my view, human effort, no matter how well-intentioned, is consistently presented as fundamentally flawed and inadequate in these divine contests, demanding a radical withdrawal of our own initiatives.
It is clear that Not Your Fight challenges us to reevaluate our understanding of strength, control, and faith in profound ways. The precise balance between human action and divine intervention, where active faith meets holy inaction, remains a point of rich, ongoing exploration within this material. It demonstrates the depth of its call to trust and surrender.
We'd certainly encourage our listeners to revisit Chapter 5, Stand Still and See Salvation, and Chapter 6, Why Your Strength Will Always Fail, as well as a conclusion to continue pondering this paradox for yourselves. There is definitely much to uncover there.